Hello everybody, this is Peter R. Smith and welcome to the ChemEng Evolution Health webinar. What we're going to talk about today is how chemical engineering can impact health and well-being principally through the development of pharmaceutical products and distribution and so on. Before we start, I think it'd be worth having a quick introduction of our panel. We have 8 or so panelists together, and I'm going to just introduce myself, and then I'll just go down the attendees and ask them to give a quick introduction to themselves, you know, half a minute or so. So as I say, I'm Peter R. Smith. I work for GSK. I am involved now in the development of digital technology for use in manufacturing processes. So if I just run down the list, Tony, could you do your piece?
Yeah, I'm Tony Margetts. I'm a chemical engineer, but pharmaceutical engineer really. I spent 12 years recently in the Far East, and I've been involved with many different types of production, including COVID-19 manufacture.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sajiwa, thanks. And sorry, I should have mentioned that Tony's camera is not quite working very well with the network connection. And so I'm afraid that's why it's a blank screen and you can't see him. Sorry, Sajiwa, could you give us a quick intro?
Hi, yeah, I'm Sujiva Sumanasena. I work for a company called Premium International in Sri Lanka. I'm a chemical engineer, graduated about 28 years ago or so. The last 8 to 9 years have been spent on introducing pharmaceutical manufacturing to Sri Lanka. So the last 8 years or so I've been trying to introduce, and at the moment we are setting up a saline plant in Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Keith?
Hello, I'm Keith Plum. I'm an independent practice safety and equipment consultant. I've been working in the pharmaceutical industry for close to 40 years. I've worked on projects with manufacturing companies, with design houses, with other consultancies, etc.
Thank you, Keith. Karen?
Hi, my name's Karen Cookman. I'm based at Loughborough University. I'm actually a pharmacologist by training, but I moved into a Department of Chemical Engineering here at Loughborough many years ago. My research focuses on the manufacture of cell-based therapies, and I'm also the director of the EPSRC and MRC Centre for Doctoral Training in Regenerative Medicine.
Thank you. Liz?
Hi, good morning. My name's Elizabeth Cheeseman. I'm a process engineer at Norbrook Pharmaceuticals Limited. I focus on sterile manufacture for veterinary medicines. Previously, I worked with Karen at Loughborough, focusing on manufacturing of stem cells and advanced therapies.
Thank you. Badru?
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Badru. I'm working for Pharmaniaga, which is a generic manufacturer, the largest company generic for manufacturing in Malaysia. And we recently make a big impact in biopharmaceutical manufacturing, where we have delivered a COVID-19 vaccine recently to the National Immunization Program. And my background, I'm a biochemical engineer. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And do we have Vicky on the call yet? Okay, so what the format of this session is, we've got an hour or so, and we're going to do a couple of short presentations just to set the scene, and then questions. I'll moderate the questions as they come in once the presentations are finished. But what we're trying to talk about here is how chemical engineers have a role in harnessing technology, platforms, and further improvements in manufacturing to essentially to reduce costs and enable greater health improvements globally. So I will kick off the presentations with a very short look at some of the technology and platform changes that we're seeing in the industry. So it's a very selective view of this, so I know there are lots of other things in there, and hopefully some of the question and answer session will bring out some more of that with the panel. So challenges for the future is what it's saying. I'm trying to set the scene for what the future might look like. So there is a shifting paradigm in pharmaceuticals in particular. Traditionally, we've had large-scale bulk manufacture, product manufacturing, of very high-volume products, relatively high volume, I should say, for pharmaceuticals. What we're moving towards now is new treatment modalities, and I'll talk about those in a moment, differentiated products, and much smaller batch sizes. And again, I'll just touch on a couple of those from my experience. We're also seeing significant increases in the complexity of manufacturing facilities and desire to sweat assets. So a lot of facilities are moving to very multi-purpose plant, novel facility types. Again, we can touch on that briefly as some of the challenges. Generally doing more with less because it's too expensive to build big facilities these days. There's also quite a significant focus in my experience on use of automation, on analytics, and striving for what is generically called smart manufacturing, although I'm going to try and avoid the word digitalization if I can as we work our way through this. So that shifting paradigm, we'll talk about the traditional chemistry, the small molecule stuff. It tends to be, bulk chemical processing, what we're very familiar with as chemical engineers, bioreactor, reactors, filtration, distillation, etc. Relatively well characterized processes because it's chemistry. Quite a significant effort in the secondary side of these, making tablets, filling vials, that kind of thing. What we see in the large pharmaceutical industries is a move to much more differentiated products and smaller batch sizes. So in this traditional space, and you can see on the right hand side there's a couple of molecules, one from 1966 which is Ventolin, and the one above it TDK, which is HIV treatment from 2013. So there's not a huge difference between the two types of molecule we're working. What is changing in the platforms and technologies that people need to come to terms with is this smaller batch size. It's about things like continuous small scale production, different types of production facility that drive us to enable us to produce a range of products more effectively. So that's the kind of traditional, if you like. In the biopharm, the large molecule space, very high value, can be very small batches, can be complicated, long production processes. They are very hard to characterize properly because the product is essentially the process. They generate a huge amount of data associated with them. And as engineers working in this space, some of the more significant challenges are around the sterility, the management of all that data, the control of operations, the peripheral things that go around the production process, and how we actually combine all that together to make our final product. And I did talk about small batches. So we actually have a product in my organization that we manufacture. It's a component of a biopharm product we make. The annual batch production of that is about 400 grams. So it's almost bench level manufacturing, but we do call it manufacturing. It's not made in a lab, it's made in a small manufacturing facility. So there's some significant changes in the way we operate facilities over time as the biopharm processes. The other area, the treatment modality that's changing big time, is something called precision medicine. You may have seen this as personalized medicine. CAR T therapy is an example. That's chimeric antigen receptor T cell treatment for patients, very targeted towards cancer. Precision because it's a single batch of product for a single patient. Very, very different way of working, very different from what we would traditionally be used to operating in. For operational companies, for example, the first operator that touches the product is actually the nurse in a clinic using an apheresis process to extract cells. The way the supply chain operates is extraordinarily important. You have to have chain of custody. You have to have a chain of identity. You need to know it's the right stuff, and you need to know it's in the right condition, and everybody's got control of it as it goes from patient to manufacturing facility. It's very patient specific. So if the patient's too ill to attend the clinic, your scheduling problem is significantly changed in that you're now dealing with, is that patient, has he got a cold, can they take the treatment, do we have to wait for 2 weeks, etc. It's extremely important, again, data. We do talk about technology in some of this. The data, the history of what you did is very, very important in that cycle of throughput. partly because licensing tends to require that we keep information and surveillance of that patient for 15 or more years, because we don't tend to do the same sort of clinical trials for these products because there's so few patients that go through the cycle. So it's a very different modality method for this. It's a growing operational way of treating people. It will become more and more prevalent and very expensive. But as an example of that for the chemical engineer of the future, this picture here is a Climax Prodigy manufacturing facility for CAR T therapy. As you can see, you could put it in your front room somewhere. You want to make 10 times as many products, you need 10 times as many machines. You can't scale up, you scale out. So when we're talking about modern manufacturing processes, the kind of facility we're looking at becomes ever more different to our experiences and our ability to develop the tooling we've got as chemical engineers to work in this kind of space. So that's a kind of give you a quick example. And the last one is when we talk about smart, and I'm sorry I did use the word digitalization, smart manufacturing. This is a framework that was developed in Singapore, the Smart Industry Readiness Index, and we're talking about the process, which I've covered some examples. We're talking about the technology and the way you organize it, the talent, the skills necessary to understand how to connect things together, how to integrate systems, how to operate these modern processes. This is where the chemical engineer of the future is going to be focused in the pharmaceutical industry, at least in the large-scale research basis. Okay, that was my quick spin through that space. I will stop sharing. If we could change presenters to Sujiwa.
Thank you, Peter. Is the screen visible?
Yeah, if you could just pop that into full screen mode for us.
Okay. Okay, my name is Sujiva Sumanasena, and I will be talking about the challenges for global access to medicines from the point of view of the developing world. Very different to what Peter was talking about. A lot of interesting stuff happening there. But here we are talking about the nuts and bolts of the basic stuff that needs to happen. In my introduction, I will talk about the role of chemical engineers with regards to facilitating the access to medicines in the developing world and helping reducing the global health inequities, and also the role that chemical engineers need to play in harnessing new technologies and platforms to help drive further improvements in manufacturing, as well as reduction of costs, and specifically about enabling greater global health improvements, because that's something that really needs to happen. And then I will relate that to part of the role that I play and the company I work for play in Sri Lanka. If we look at the pharmaceutical industry and the accessibility to medication, if we look at the developing world, of a world population of about 8 billion, 6.5 billion people live in the developing countries. And as per the World Bank and the WHO, almost half of the world's population are unable to access essential health services, which includes not just the health services, but also the pharmaceuticals. Then looking into it in more detail, the WHO, the World Health Organization, has published a list of essential medicines that should be available to treat the patients of any country. And whether it's OST, the large volume parenterals, small volume parenterals, vaccines, or other modern medication and smart meds, I think in general we have a lack of most of the medication in very many of the developing nations. Then relating it back to sort of the Sri Lankan setup. Sri Lanka is a small country, only about 21 million people, reasonable life expectancy about 77 years, very high rate of deaths due to non-communicable diseases, 70%. Communicable diseases are much lower. Injuries are reasonably high, deaths due to injuries. But also, Sri Lanka has a universal healthcare system. Everything from getting an appointment to see a doctor, to getting a tablet of paracetamol, or even a bypass operation, a heart operation, or a kidney transplant, all is free under the government service. Of course, there's a private sector too, but this is one of the unique things about Sri Lanka. Then relating this information back to the pharmaceutical industry, Sri Lanka's pharmaceutical industry is very small. Currently, only about 17 to 18% of the total pharmaceutical requirement is produced in the country, and all the rest is imported. What we have been doing, and this is something that we will talk a little bit more in detail, is as Premium International and the head of the pharmaceutical division there, we have been trying to introduce new technology to Sri Lanka, because if you take the industry 10 years ago, everything that was there had been set up about a minimum of 20 years before that, and almost all industry was very basic. The only one that was actually of a standard that was acceptable was the State Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Corporation, which had been set up at that time 20 years ago. So I'm talking 1980s, Japanese funded project. It was a grant from Japan. At that time when it was installed, it was a state-of-the-art facility, but over 20-year period, due to age, due to more newer technologies, it was just a very basic plant. So one of the things we did was they had a requirement to improve their throughput, and we introduced some German technology, high-speed tableting machines, to get the speed up by about 25%. The other thing that we have been doing as a company in Sri Lanka who are into introducing new technology, we have been looking at, we have been scouting for technology. We have been looking at different regions of the world for different types of medication and technology. We are right next door to India. So an obvious choice for Sri Lanka is go to India to get the technology for most of the things we require. Technology from other countries is essential only for some of the other products where the Indian technology might not be the most suitable. And of course, when you're introducing technology, what is essential, and this is one of the key things I think that really, even for the future, what is really going to be the driving factor is the technology transfer. Because if you don't transfer the production technology from experienced and repeated manufacturers, you don't transfer the technology for the DMFs, and you don't get the people to come and teach how plants needs to be run, you can't really set up a technology that is going to deliver something good when you're manufacturing. And our role has been ensuring that all these things are actually brought in to Sri Lanka. Then I'm going to talk about a specific thing we have done, which is about setting up of the LVP plant to manufacture saline, dextrose, and some of the other large volume parenterals in Sri Lanka. Our client has a buyback facility with the government to supply saline and some other products to the Ministry of Health, and we decided to bring in technology and help the client to set up this plant. The saline that is available in Sri Lanka currently comes in polyethylene bottles that doesn't withstand the high temperature sterilization, the 1 to 1 degrees sterilization that is required. We decided that rather than following the same way of doing things, we would introduce a better technology. We introduced a modern technology where soft non-PVC PP bags were to be manufactured to make the saline. Of course, saline in a soft bag is capable of being sterilized at 121 degrees, and it has a good water barrier. Overall, it's a much better product. Now, when you want to bring in a different technology, we also needed to make sure that the technology transfer needed to happen, and we brought in multiple parties, Austrian consultants, Chinese technology providers, and Indian operational expertise, just to make sure that this whole process actually happened in the right way with the best possible solution. The other thing that needs to happen as things improve in any country is that the standards applicable need to be collaborated and correlate with the international standards. Now in Sri Lanka, we only had Sri Lankan GMP, which was very basic, and part of our role and one of the things we did was to lobby the government to ensure that a better standard will be applicable to new plants that are going to be put up in Sri Lanka for pharmaceutical manufacture. And as we have been lobbying for it, the plant that we designed and we are setting up at the moment also meets WHO Geneva standards. And this is one of the things that's an upgrade from the conventional GMP standards. Now this applies to, I guess, not just Sri Lanka, any country where new industry is being set up. And we are still talking about generation 1 pharmaceutical products here, not just making sure that the technology is transferred. We also need to, as chemical engineers, ensure that the right standards are applied when it comes to the manufacturing process. Just to finish off the presentation, I will just run a very small video clip of a schematic of what is being installed. Thank you, everyone. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Sajiva. Great. So, two slightly different views of the world. I think we'll open up to questions. There is a Q&A section in the chat in the box, so if you could put any questions in there. I think I'll kick off with one for the panel generally, just to follow on from that really. What role chemical engineers of the future can play in developing solutions to tackle global pandemics, especially if we take lessons from COVID-19, what we've done. So what skills do we need to develop in the future for chemical engineers? So does anybody want to take that one, or am I going to pick somebody randomly from the group?
If you like, Peter, I'll make a start from my experience with the IChemE and ISPE COVID-19 response team. This included a reasonable number of engineers from the UK and some around the world, including Sajiva. I must say Sajiva played an extremely active part in that team. But I think he had an advantage over us that the communication channel to the Sri Lankan government seems rather shorter than ours. And I think this, in any response to a pandemic or whatever, the important point is we as engineers, I believe, need to sharpen our communication skills and get much closer to governments. We responded in the UK right at the beginning when there was a call for help. We wrote an official letter from the institution to whoever it was supposed to go to, can't remember. We got an answer 9 months later saying, thank you for your letter. And the simple reality is that in the UK, and I suspect elsewhere, we're just not connected to governments enough. We saw in the media lots about discovery, extremely important part of the vaccines and development, but we didn't see much real stuff about manufacturing. And what I can only assume, a huge number of engineers were working extremely hard to get this stuff, the vaccines actually into manufacturing. Very little of that ever got mentioned. We tried to increase the access to the government in the UK. The main route is through the Royal Academy of Engineering, but even that was torturous. We got somewhere, but not very far. And interestingly, the Royal Academy remarked on the fact that the Institution of Chemical Engineers had been the most proactive. I think the second was the Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineers. So there's a huge amount for us to do. Yes, we need sort of changes to engineering, etc., and all the things that you remarked on, Peter. But we also need to take a lot of notice of what Sajiva said, in the sense of, you know, what the difference is between what's happening in the UK and other parts of the developed world and what's happening in places like Sri Lanka, and they're very different. But to me, sharpening up our communication skills is the #1 thing that we need to do if we're going to make any difference.
Okay, that's good. Anybody else want to add? Yeah,
okay. All right, thank you. I'll go first. All right, just to share our experience during the COVID-19 pandemic, where Pharma Niaga has been in the pharma business for more than 25 years. And we only moved into vaccine manufacturing in 2018. During the pandemic, the facility is not even ready. But we have a small, sterile, small volume injectable plant, which is already in operation for more than 10 years. So what we do, a bunch of engineers quickly think of how to turn this small volume injectable plant into a vaccine fill and finish facility. So what we did a minor modification to where instead of, because we don't have the supply of the bulk formulated vaccines actually from China, we actually working with Sinovac. The formulated bulk coming in the sterile bag of 200 liters. In the facility where we do the dispensing and compounding, where the piping is huge and away from the filling line. So what we do, we quickly plan how to convert the facility into a sterile small volume injectable for vaccine, where we incorporate the single-use technology from Sartorius and Paul, whereby we push the bulk formulated vaccine near to the filling line. That involves a lot of engineering aspect in terms of process, because you have to validate and do some modification to the clean room, including the transport processes. We did that quickly within a few months. And then by the time we had the supply of the bulk, we managed to validate the facility and eventually inspected by the national authority. And Pharma Niaga was one of the major vaccine supply for the government during the COVID-19 vaccination, together, of course, with imported drugs such as, at that time, Pfizer. So I believe with the knowledge of detailed process engineering and biopharmaceutical, we were able to assemble this project for the sake of national security of vaccine supply, because I believe because Malaysia never really have any vaccine facility. So this is first project, and we were able successfully to deliver that. and be part of the success program of national vaccination.
Cool. Thank you. Karen, you put your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I think the other thing we really need to think about in terms of education is also making sure that all of our graduates have a really good understanding of regulations and health economics, because I think, you know, a lot of what Suji was talking about, what we heard about in the pandemic more broadly, was inaccessibility of some of our solutions actually to developing countries, whether that's, you know, the sort of physical aspects of can you get something that's supposed to be stored in liquid nitrogen to, you know, the middle of some of those more remote regions, or whether it's about cost. So I think actually making sure that our graduates of the future have a really good understanding, and I'm sure they already do to some degree, you know, but of some of those external forces that particularly the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industry are working in, you know, is quite important.
Yeah, sorry. Good. I think it's a good point. Liz, yeah.
Yeah, I think just picking up from that as well, regulations are only going one way, and that's getting bigger. And to use that dreaded word of digitalization, how we monitor our processes and how we can use that information to, you know, make sure that we're adhering to the regulations as they evolve. I think it's going to be key for process engineers, chemical engineers in our space. Like, I come from a very different space to what you were talking about earlier, Peter. You're talking about very small volumes. We're working with generic products, very large volumes, but many diverse products, but on a generic manufacturing train. So I think as the technologies evolve, applying digitalization even to our historic products is going to really revolutionize what we're trying to do.
That's good. Good, yeah. And so I kind of broaden that a little bit, and I do take the point that the technology, it can look a little bit blinkered if you look at only precision medicine for the future for Western markets and so on. But I think the technology, some of it anyway, is a lot cheaper than it used to be. It's a lot more cost effective to implement. So do we feel as a group, and I'd broaden that question out to everybody, can we make use of that kind of technology to even enhance manufacturing in the developing world? So Sujiwa's comments about the way in which you have to, you know, update facilities, but also build in the regulatory capability so that you're actually more leading edge. Would we put technology in there? Does that mean, amongst the things I've heard, you know, health economics and understanding of the real costs of manufacture and the impact, the communication with business, the flexibility, but the technical skills that need to be there, irrespective of where you are in the world? Is that kind of a view, people? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely, it's true. You know, my experience of working in the Far East, the people need to be able to adopt and understand the role of these different technologies and how they can be used. Yeah, I think it's really important. And digitalization is just a tool really to help basically get more information from the point of use, the factory floor, and use that information better to achieve the objectives of better production, reduced cost, more medicines for the people. I'm sure that's what, and we've been able to show that with some of the projects that we've run out in the Far East.
Okay, good. Any other comments from anybody? Vicky, I know you came in. I know we didn't see you before. Any thoughts from your side? Hi.
Must be on mute.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can do now. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, no, I was having some problems connecting my webcam to the session. But yes, I managed to catch a bit of the last discussion, and I think, yeah, digitalization definitely does have a role, especially from where I'm coming in from the R&D side of things. I'm definitely seeing a big impact in terms of the length of time it's taking to especially develop a process, and kind of the focus now switching to this data-rich experiments, especially in the early stages of the the process development stage. I think is really helping to kind of accelerate, especially when you have very fast products to market.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds sensible. And we actually got a question coming. I just want to bring from Dr. Ian Thomas in Melbourne. it's a really, it's I guess related to what we were saying there, and probably quite a timely one at this point. Are we sure that there are enough raw materials for the manufacturing operations we're describing? So are we going to run out of stuff given the population pressures? Are we at the limits of, I guess that's the way I'm interpreting this, your fuel, concrete, water, so on. It's particularly in parts of the world that are maybe more impacted by climate change now than they have been in the past. What's the panel? Very, very different perspective, but actually quite an important one, because it doesn't matter how good you are at providing processes for the developing world. If you can't build a process in the developing world, it's going to be quite a challenge. Any thoughts?
Okay, I can go. All right. Basically, yeah, I think it's a global crisis on drug supply currently post-pandemic, where people. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think it's a global phenomena combined with pandemics and war in Russia and supply of raw material from China. Even we face that in even national crisis in supply of drugs. Not that we are not capable of making it, but it's sudden surge in demand way beyond your current capability. Because in process plant design, we design for a specific output, and suddenly the demand increased by certain numbers multiple times. Then more of the getting into enough stock to supply. Not really about not able to supply. It will take some time to stabilize. Yeah.
Okay.
More of that issue.
Yeah. So it's more to do with the flexibility. I know. Or the sort of surges in demand during the pandemic, I know that we effectively couldn't source single-use bioreactor bags. You know, the plastic bags that were being used for vaccine manufacture, it was almost impossible to buy them anywhere. And notwithstanding what may well be an environmental impact of using lots of plastic bags and then having to dispose of them, but the actually availability of that kind of product became quite challenging at times. Yeah, it's good. Okay, we sort of tackled that one. Any thoughts? Anybody else?
Peter.
Keith, go on.
Sorry, did you say me or Vicky? I missed that.
Keith, you go first, and then I'll go around everybody.
Yeah, just echoing the point there about particularly the pandemic, and something that the COVID-19 response team identified, that there was definitely issues in the supply chain. And you said just with single-use equipment, but in lots of other areas, lots of small molecules that come in to the vaccine manufacturing thing were just not available. But I think that's a bit of a symptom of the fact that the pharmaceutical supply chain at the present moment is generally very complex. That a lot of stuff was coming from China. That the actual way the industry is set up is very complicated. Less and less things are being made in-house, so that most manufacturers you're talking about are probably only making the end bit of the process. So there's a lot of complexity that came in, and the COVID-19 pandemic really tested the pharmaceutical supply chain, and that's something else that needs looking at. Whether it's relevant to chemical engineers directly, I'm not certain, but it's certainly something that needs looking at. And just a very quick one on a completely different note about availability. I mean, there are some raw materials that are just simply very hard to get. I've been working on a radiopharmaceutical project where the reason for making the product, which is a radioactive isomer, is because in nature it hardly exists at all. Yeah. So you need to do the process just to make the isotope that you want to use. So there certainly are issues, and there's some of those issues can be addressed by chemical engineers.
Yeah, it's good, Keith. I wonder if there's a bit, you know, the recycle, reuse, reduce mantra, which I think we've seen quite a lot. I wonder if there is I don't know what it is, because I can't think of one beginning with R, but a supply chain element associated with localization or changing the dynamic, because of we've all seen it with, I mean, know if anybody's ever tried to buy a car. I have colleagues who've tried to buy a car and on a 1-year waiting list to buy a car because there aren't any chips to go in the car. There's several other things. I've bought a bike recently. It took 6 months for the bike to come because the supply chain is so complex and it doesn't behave very well. So I wonder if there's a piece for our engineers, where chemical engineers coming up, where they need to learn a different way of approaching not the just-in-time manufacturing with supplies sourced all over the world. I will just go so people put their hands up there. Vicky, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, you know, that around flexibility and impact on the supply chain, definitely I think the role of continuous manufacturing and, you know, the building out of, you know, modular plants that you see starting off at, you know, Novartis, GSK, Pfizer, is definitely, will have I think a positive impact in terms of bringing that agility to the manufacturing side of things.
Good. Okay, thanks. And Karen, I know you put your...
I'm afraid you stole my thunder, Peter. I was going to mention exactly what you did around this sort of reduce, you know, recycle, because I think there's a lot to be said for, you know, how much water goes into some of our pharmaceutical processes and whether we can look at how we reduce that, you know, the solvents that are used for some of the downstream processes, you know, and also I think whether we can valorize any of our waste products, you know, things that are coming out, you know, that are currently being just, you know, dumped effectively, whether there's something we can do much more effectively there. And hopefully there'll be the sort of next generation of chemical engineers who, you know, think much more about kind of that circular economy because it's being covered in curricula now, you know, and they can hopefully kind of introduce that into the next generation. And then to speak to, you know, Elizabeth's point earlier, also how we introduce some of those concepts into existing processes, so it's not just being brought into brand new ones.
Yeah, good. Okay.
I'm sorry, I was just going to respond very quickly to Karen there. Sorry, Liz. I kind of completely agree with that. I'm working on a project at the moment where all of that, in a number of funny ways, is kind of coming in as well, even to the point about looking at rainwater collection for use not directly in the process, but to cut down water usage. So that's quite important. That was even in a wet country.
Yeah. Just quickly there, a little bit building on what you've already talked about. In Thailand we used the national facility that's used for making vaccines, that's run by the GPO, the Government Pharmaceutical Organization, and we were able to modify that to actually make COVID-19 vaccine by growing using the egg-based technology, which is a flu-based technology, but using the same technology, it was possible to make a COVID-19 vaccine in the same plant. And just out of interest, that plant is able to generate all its electricity with solar panels on the roof.
Oh, interesting. Very good.
Yeah. If you're interested more about that, it won a prize in the ISPE Facility of the Year competition last year.
Cool. Thank you. Good. Liz, I know you put your hand up.
Sure. I was thinking about how we sterilize our processes. You know, we're asking about raw materials. There's a question over gas supplies in Europe this year, and it's incredibly energy intensive to run steam plants. So how that's going to evolve in the future, how can we more effectively sterilize our big facilities, will be a question to drive, you know, future innovation and keep us competitive.
Yeah, it's a good point. And we have a couple more comments and questions in here.
One other on the same thing what you're talking about. Now, when we design plants, the green energy or the energy, all that comes into play. So generally, if we are ever doing a plant in Sri Lanka, we would always look at the solar panels going on the roof. Rainwater harvesting, things like that. Now it's actually getting almost written into building code, so that if we are looking at it from a very basic point of view of engineering, some of these things are now happening automatically. I think this is where the regulations and some of the other things play a part, because once people actually start realizing that there is so much you can do in small quantities to improve your energy consumptions, that should just be second nature to any of the engineers doing any designs these days.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Yeah. So I'm just conscious of a couple of questions have come in again. I think so. It was Karen Deverley. I think she was agreeing that we, simplify the supply chain where we can, or work better at modularizing rather than just in time. So maybe the mantra goes from just in time to more modular, more flexible, I guess, is the question there. There is I'll come to another one in a second slightly, but while we're talking about scarcity of material, there's a question from Helen Ramsey around that using the opportunities or merit in the work of Francis Arnold on directed evolution of enzymes to produce chemical substances in a more sustainable way. So I suppose that's if you widen the question slightly, are there technologies that we should be looking at that make a less energy intensive, less or more sustainable as a process future? I don't know, anybody thoughts on those? I'm not aware of it. Yeah, Keith.
Yeah, I take the point of the questioner about changing the chemistry or to biochemistries and all the other points, but I think the other one we haven't explored, and I think this perhaps addresses Liz's point about steam for sterilisation, and that's more use of continuous processes. If we have continuous processes, generally speaking, the equipment's a lot smaller, and if it's a lot smaller, it's going to need less steam. So I think there is scope for that kind of change as well. So we certainly need to look at the chemistry. I mean, going back to early days of when I first started, I remember processes for APIs that needed 20, 25 steps. And when you consider that each step was at best about 80% efficient, by the time you got to the end of the thing, there was a lot of waste. You ended up, the whole grown process was lucky if it was 10% yield compared to what your starting material was. Yeah. So we've certainly improved on that, but I think there's a long way to go. And maybe on process intensification as well. Certainly, again, much of my early experience was as the fact that you did a step, you separated the intermediate, you might purify the intermediate, you did a lot of fiddling around with it, and then you put it back in yet another reactor and did some more reaction. If you actually intensified the process so that you didn't do quite as much as that, you might find there's a huge amount of saving as well. So a lot of these technologies have been around for a long time in chemical engineering. I'm just not sure that the pharmaceutical industry is using them as much as we should be using them in order to make the kind of changes that we've been talking about here.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. I mean, continuous, I'm trying to remember the first time I saw continuous tablet manufacturing or continuous processing. It's 20 something years ago, the first pilot plants for doing it. And I don't think it's moved much from that point. We haven't really, and maybe we haven't had to. I mean, maybe that's the thing. We haven't had to bite the bullet and do something completely different because we can get away with what we currently do. Maybe now we'll see some of that impetus of pushing us to do different things because we have no choice. If you can't get the raw materials or the energy costs are so high, it suddenly focuses your mind very strongly, doesn't it, on having to do something different. Hi, Liz. Yeah.
Just to add to that there, I think it's because we're in such a highly regulated environment, and necessarily so, that every change is a challenge. So when you have something that works and maybe it's inefficient, there's less of a drive to make that change, but as supply chains constrain us and as we're pushed in other ways, then I agree with you. I think we might be driven that way.
Yeah. Makes sense. I have a question from a slightly different topic. It's a little bit about, I think, about the way in which you might manufacture in the future. It's from Phil Mason, and it says, does the panel believe that in the future we may see pharmaceutical manufacturing in container-sized units? The containers are the approved facility. You put them wherever you need to put them, bolt them together, as it were, and then off you go, make your product. But the facility's pre-built, pre-located. And I've seen ideas along that line, right up to, I think, the DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in America, were investigating sort of suitcase-sized vaccine manufacturing units to take into war zones. So you make your product there and then and use it. So I guess that's any thoughts on that? I mean, it does sound slightly science fiction-y. So, Keith. Yeah.
Sorry, it isn't science fiction. It's already happening. If you look in radiopharmaceuticals, there are certainly some of the isotopes are made in generators that are in a suitcase. In fact, smaller than a suitcase, I think. I've recently been looking into this again, as I said, on radiopharmaceuticals. There are a number of drivers here, not least the fact that the product is radioactive. And the last thing you want in a radioactive environment is any people. More so than GMP, because basically you're in a position where you can kill them. So it's not, you've got to change your thinking. And some of the technology I've seen there recently is driving towards your. So I can't remember who, but I think it was you that put it up, Peter. That was the picture of the little rig to make an advanced medicine. I can't remember exactly what it was. The CAR-T, I think. But when you look in radiopharmaceuticals, they're essentially already doing that. I've seen technology that is 3D printed, so that the process plant is on a plastic chip. Isn't quite the right word because it's not that small, but certainly on something that's measuring less than 100 mil by 50 mil kind of size. You need some ancillary kit to drive it, but it can be single use or not used too much and just ejected. And the big advantage of this kind of thing is getting it out of the facility, because once you've used that particular module, it's going to be radioactive. So the radio farms industry is doing a tremendous amount already in this direction. We're automating, they're using digitalization. Now, one of the problems that we talked about is the fact that the incoming material, which is on this process I was looking at, is legacy material. It's been around in drums for a long time. I mean, nobody quite knows exactly what's inside the drums. The records have gone to. There's a kind of robotic need, and we were looking into this in a very quick discussion I had with somebody. Suggested, well, if in the robots we're looking at now, look at the drum and then work out how they're going to open it. So that's pushing your AI bit, if that's what you want to call it, quite a long way. So I think there's plenty there. There's another piece which I think is quite important, which I read in the Chemical Engineer just recently, where somebody wrote an article about advanced guidance for AGVs using the technology used for film cameras, where the accuracy of moving the AGV around is drastically improved. And this gives us a scope for the kind of pipeline concept that's been around for a long time, that help maybe continuous, maybe batch, maybe modular. There's a whole new world. If you look at that, the idea's been around, but wasn't really able to do it. Now we can.
Yeah, good point. Yes, I guess it's one of the benefits of the technology move.
Yeah, I totally agree with Keith. Maybe radioisotope manufacturing in single container is quite common, but this kind of technology more suitable for personalized medicine, such as CAR-T cell. But comparing the cost of this new technology to your radioisotope, what is your comment? What is the obstacle from people moving into this technology? Because my assumption, especially in developing countries, personalized medicine is something very expensive and not everybody can afford it. So how to make it affordable? Keith, maybe your comment on that? Sorry, I'm asking a question instead.
It's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually a very good point about the affordability. But as I said, much of what we're talking about, I mean, obviously the ancillary piece of machinery that operates something like a single-use rig, which might have been 3D printed, is going to be relatively expensive. But I think that's where the trick's going to come with this, to get the price down, is that the same as anything else, is that we haven't used what the electronics industry has done, which is that you make lots and lots and lots and lots of the same thing. And when you do that, the price goes down. And I think that's what we've got to do here, is if we're going to have it, the control system, the driver that runs these small modules has got to be a fairly common component so that we can make a lot of them and get the price down. And they can then be made, as electronics are, in places that can have got the right kind of cost base to make equipment cheaply. I mean, because what's going to make it any different is the 3D printed bit that you put in it, because that's the chemical plant. You know, I mean, these things are tiny chemical plants, but they've got all the components that the chemical plant's going to need in order to do the chemistry. And I just think that there is something there. It's possibly a long way off, but I really take your point. But the answer is, let's stop building one-off expensive plants.
Yeah.
I've been involved with plants that cost, you know, tens of not more millions of pounds and never got used. And let's stop doing that. Let's start making plants that, you know, let's start making plants like car manufacturers make cars. If you built one car, you know, a new car, and only built one of them, it would be tens, if not hundreds of millions of pounds. And that's what we do. We just keep doing it. Every plant we ever build is a prototype. Let's stop doing it. Let's start making things that are all the same, like the car manufacturers do, and then you can customize it by putting different bits in. We really do have to start thinking differently.
It's a really good point, Keith. I'm conscious of time. There was a question I wanted to sort of ask. Maybe I'm not saying wrap up the themes together, but the question is really, because this is about chemical engineering for the future. So what is it, the chemical engineers of the future, we think, after all of this conversation, what do we think they need to learn? What's different? I mean, Karen, you're very good on the health economics, and I completely agree that, if you like, the true cost of operating and things, and how you make things more efficient. So anybody got any opinion? Or go around the panel and just see what is it we need our up and coming chemical engineers to learn that's different from what we did, because it's very different from what I did when I was at university. So I'll start. I'll go around the panel. Sajiwa, would you want to have any thoughts?
I think what you were talking about, the digitalization, talking about sort of how you get some of the modern technologies that may be available that we are not using in pharma right now, or which is being used but not commonly, getting that bit into the future chemical engineers, where they actually see that, and what Karen was talking about, tying up that with the economics, understanding as to how we make something really work for the investment we put in. I think are very important, because without those two things anyway, nothing can really function.
Cool, thank you. Karen, your thoughts?
I think we need to get better at learning from the past. You know, I think what Keith has just been saying about, you know, not rebuilding the same factory effectively, you know, every single time, and having not learned from the fact that, you know, some of these things get mothballed is, you know, a sign that we need to make a change. And I think as well, when I think about some of those new modalities, particularly in the cell therapy space, you know, lots of people focused for quite a few years on how do we, you know, scale that up. And then suddenly we thought, actually, how are we going to preserve these different types of cells so that we can do that delivery administration piece? And it's a real shame, because I think if we thought about those two things holistically, we might have some better solutions by now, particularly when you spoke, you know, early on about that piece, you know, if somebody's ill and it can't be, you know, used there, and then what do we do? So again, just learn from the past would be my mantra.
Cool, excellent, thank you. Liz?
I think maybe keep focusing on lean manufacturing tools, Six Sigma, introducing our students to those kind of concepts earlier on, I think would be helpful as we move forward, and totally agree with Keith, Karen, keep learning from the past.
Cool. Great. Badarul?
For young chemical engineers who's entering into pharmaceutical industry, they need to expand their knowledge in regulatory, definitely, and now the future biotechnology and cell and gene therapy, they need to to have more understanding on process biotechnology rather than just a pure chemical engineering. That would be a key successful for any interested engineers moving into this segment.
Okay, thank you. That's good. Vicky, any thoughts from you?
I think that especially there's a lot to be done around the work, like digitalization and automation. And I think that, as you see more and more machine learning and like AI algorithms being used, not just for, trying to find the best molecule to treat disease, but also like implementing it into like our process development workflows. I think there's a big skills gap that's there in the industry right now, and I think focusing on understanding machine learning, automation, I think that is kind of where the trend is going.
Okay, thank you. Good. And Tony, do you have any thoughts?
I think that chemical engineers are very, very good as the glue in technical teams, because they have an understanding of processes and all sorts of engineering, and I think that will continue. And I think it's really important for the future that the future chemical engineers can be, the glue that holds these project teams together, managing projects. So they need bioprocess understanding, they need process understanding, and they need the modern tools of digitalization as well, and the communication skills.
Yeah.
And actually, I would just tack on and say, and some chemistry, actually, some basic chemistry.
Yeah. Keith, your thoughts?
Just very quick ones, really, which is think small, think scale out, not scale up, and learn from other industries. Let's get out of our pharmaceutical industry silo.
Good, thank you. And so I'll finish with my thoughts, which I echo pretty much everything everybody said. I think there's some significant focus areas that we need to drive into our up and coming chemical engineering space, around technology, around communication, around the supply chain, and reuse and reduction, and different approaches that are, I think, it's quite exciting. If I was a chemical engineer now, to be honest, it's a different world, especially in pharmaceutical. And I do completely agree. Let's not just focus on being pharmaceutical people. Let's look at what everybody else is doing, even if it's automotive or chip manufacturer or something that does something different, so we can learn from that. We do tend to protect ourselves by the regulated bit sometimes. It's a good excuse not to do anything. Okay, we've gone past our allotted hour that we said we do for this. I know there's a few questions we haven't quite got around to answering, which we might look at offline, but I wanted to draw it to a close. So I thank everybody on the panel for all your time and input. Very good. Sajiwa for the presentation and effort he put into doing that. IChemE for the organisation, and of course everybody who's attended and participated in the question and answer and discussion. I hope you found it useful. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.